So I hit record, and Abby, there she is. So I know Abby's got some sick kids at home. I appreciate so much for you to be here. Thank you. It's great. So Abby and I met many years ago. She is with Big B Coffee. And if anybody that knows me, you know that I'm a huge Big B Coffee fan, and I have it auto shipped and all the fun stuff. But Abby also has a story I really wanted her to share with us, because I think when so many of us we've got so many things going on, and you've got some drama, and something drastic happens in your life, you don't know how to handle it. Well, Abby will tell her story. She not only handled it very well, but she's gone through some growth. So I so appreciate you being here and sharing it with us. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell our story. And if anybody has any questions, throw them in the chat or unmute yourself, and we'll get them answered. All right, Abby, it's all yours.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Deb. I am so honored to be here, and I am so inspired from hearing all of the amazing things you women are working on in your world. So I wish I was closer so I could be involved, but I am in a very small town called Farwell, Michigan. It's just about an hour and a half north of our Big B Coffee home office. But so I professionally work at the Big B Coffee home office. I'm the franchise sales manager. I have almost helped triple the size of the organization. I've helped add new states. I have helped people become entrepreneurs and open their very first small business. I've helped people sign for their 20th small business. So it's been a phenomenal journey. I will hit my 10-year anniversary in April. And Big B Coffee is just part of my life, honestly. So my story, it is, I would say, a unique one. I did hear throughout the morning that maybe a couple women on this call have experienced some of the same things I have. I do want to excuse myself. I am also a little under the weather, so I might stop and blow my nose. I apologize. Just trying to make the best of these winter blues. But so personally, I am a wife coming up on my 17-year wedding anniversary. I have 3 children. I have a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So my house is busy, busy, busy all of the time. My story is not over yet. It is still being written. However, I do think that I have a story of overcoming, choosing to find joy, and continued growth. I'm sure that all of you here have heard of a condition that many people, unfortunately, in our country have and still do suffer from, called PTSD. That would be post traumatic stress disorder. And I don't know how many of you have heard of another disorder that comes from traumatic events, and that would be the post traumatic growth syndrome. And the idea that after a traumatic event, one person can experience exorbitant amounts of growth and come out the end of that situation a better, more rounded, more diverse, more empathetic and loving person than they ever could have imagined. So brief just about my life in general. I am one of 3. I am the youngest. I have a sister who's 4 years older than me and a brother who's 2 years older than me. My parents divorced when I was 9. My dad got remarried to a woman that did not like me when I was 11, and I had 2 stepsisters. It was a little bit of a Cinderella story, but that's not the point of today. It's just a little background to help understand who I am. My mother passed away when I was 16 years old of multiple sclerosis, and I was kicked out of my home when I was 18 because, again, my stepmother did not like me. I was on a whirlwind adventure when I was 18, 19 years old. I met my husband on January 15th. We were engaged on April 1st of that very same year. We found out we were expecting a child on June 6th of that very same year. And then June 26th, we got married. So within 6 months of meeting, we were engaged, pregnant, married. Talk about living by the seat of your pants. I quickly had 2 children back to back right away. My first 2 children are only 15 months apart, and I thought I was done. I started my career when my boys were young. I believe they were 4 and 5 when I started working at the Big B Coffee home office. And I thought I had my 2 kids, my husband, my career. I was set on my path. I knew what was going to happen, and it was laid out in front of me. And then my sister-in-law ended up having another baby, which ended up giving my husband a bit of baby fever. So 5 years ago, my husband and I decided to add another child to our family. Fast forward a little bit, he was born, he was beautiful, he was perfect, happy baby. His name was Gabriel Thomas. I am using the word was, so I kind of think you might know where that's going. Um, so it was, I might get just a little emotional. Sorry, sometimes I can tell it without crying, sometimes I can't. And I think the being sick makes it a little bit more emotional.
Every time
But
I hear
so
it, I want to cry with you. So thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing this with us.
So it was a rainy May 29th in 2019. And it was weird because that morning, my car was actually in the shop. So my husband was getting me to work and dropping Gabriel off at daycare. And I didn't have a car, so he had to take me. So he took me and he dropped me off at work. I ended up being just a little bit late that morning because my husband paints. At the time, he was a painter, so he would paint residential homes. And he had a lot of equipment in his car, so there just wasn't room. And I was a little frustrated with him that morning because he knew he had to take me to work. He wasn't prepared. But while we waited in the house, Gabe wanted to nurse again, so I sat down with him. One thing with Gabriel, because I had my first two children so young, I didn't have the ability to be a stay-at-home mom. There was no way that would ever have worked in our situation. So I didn't get a time to really just cherish being a mom with my first two. And so with Gabriel, that was something that I just always told myself, he's only little once. If he needs a little extra love, give it to him. Pretty soon, he's not gonna want to snuggle me. He's not gonna want to nurse. And so I really just, throughout his whole life, I'm very, very thankful that I always took the extra minute for him. I always remembered he's just little and he just needs his mom, and that's okay. And so that morning, my husband, right before my two older boys went to school, he happened to say, let's just play hooky. Let's just stay home today. Let's not go anywhere. And I said, no, the boys have to go to school. I have to go to work. We have to be responsible. And so we did that. We did the responsible thing. So fast forward to about 10:15 in the morning, I was actually in the back of our office, in the back of house. I was actually pumping and I was listening to a sermon. The title of the sermon happened to be Friend of God. And I want, at the end of my life, I want to look back and know that I was a friend of God, that God would have called me someone he wanted to be friends with, like Abraham or Joseph or Elijah. So that's what I was listening to. And my phone rang and it was my sister. She happens to be the one who takes care of my children, my child. She was the daycare. And at first I said, oh, I don't have time for this. I'm doing other things. I'm not going to answer. And then that little voice in the back of my head said, you need to answer this phone call. I answered the phone and it was my sister saying over and over and over, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. What had happened is, unfortunately, she was not paying enough attention and she left the back door open. And my rambunctious, adventurous 15-month-old son walked out into the backyard, climbed into a pool, and drowned. And so my perfectly healthy, beautiful baby passed away on May 29th at 15 months old in one day. This was something that I never, ever, ever thought I would go through. I never imagined would happen to me. And previous to that, you always say, if this happens, this is how I'll react. If this happens, I'll do this. I'm here to say, you really have no idea how you're going to react until that moment actually happens to you. You hope that you'll act a certain way, but then when the world comes crashing on you, down on you, and you feel like you're stuck in space and everyone else is moving, but you're not, you just don't know how you're going to react. My husband and I chose not to press charges on my sister. At the time, she had a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I did not think it was fair in this situation that not only I lose a child, but 2 children lose their mother. And so we chose forgiveness. So shortly after Gabriel passed away, I have two things that happened to me that really decided the trajectory of where I was going to go post Gabriel dying. Number one, before those two stories, number one, I knew from the moment Gabriel died, I could not die with him. I had to keep living and moving forward. Number one, for myself. I have always been a person of joy. I have always been one to laugh and be silly and just want to find the joy, the silver lining, the good things in life. I hate being miserable. I hate being sad. I just much rather praise the Lord for all the joy in the world. So I knew right away when Gabe died, I couldn't die too. I also knew right away that my husband, he did not grow up with a strong foundation and faith in God. So although he was a baptized or is a baptized member of our church, and he did too lean on God, I knew that his foundation was not as secure as mine. I knew that he had not experienced loss like I had in my life when my mother passing away of multiple sclerosis at 16. And I knew that I had to be a rock for him. I knew that he needed me more than ever. There are horrible statistics of what happened to marriages after a child is lost in the marriage, whether it be a father's fault, a mother's fault, no one's fault. There's just really bad things happen to marriages after a child is lost. And so I didn't want that to be the end of my story. So I knew we had to communicate. There couldn't be any blaming. We had to be able to be angry, mad, sad, glad. We had to be able to express all of those feelings to one another and have that be okay. But then I also had to remember I had two boys that were beautiful and healthy and strong and vibrant. And I could not stop being their mother at that moment in time. They needed me more than anyone else because they just lost their brand new baby brother who they loved so much. And they're just little. They didn't know how to process all these big, scary, ugly emotions. And I knew my boys needed a mom and they couldn't lose her in this situation. So I had some things to hold on to from the beginning that I knew I wasn't going to let go of. And that helped me through those initial first days. So Gabriel passed away on a Wednesday. On Saturday, we went to church, and my church, it's for Lansing, Michigan. It's pretty big, but so there was quite a few people who wanted to talk to me. And one of the deaconesses at the church told me, Abby, I really think you need to talk to this woman. I unfortunately do not remember her name. I wish I did. She's not usually there, but she did happen to be there that Sabbath. And so she shares with me that she is from a country in Africa that saw a lot of war and a lot of civil war, a lot of very scary things in life. And so unfortunately, while these wars were taking place, one of her very young 1-year-old children were murdered by the opposite forces. And so this had happened 20 years ago. So she was very much, not healed, I would say, but it wasn't a fresh wound. And she looked at me and she said, Abby, I can tell you today, standing here right now, God has shown me so many blessings from losing my baby that I can tell you I would go through it again. And boy, did that astound me, because I just lost my son 4 days ago. And here's this woman who's saying that she lost her son and she would go through it again. Like, this is the most catastrophic event that has ever happened in my life. Like, the world has stopped spinning, people. And this woman is saying that she would do it again. I didn't know how to respond. So I just tucked it away. I thanked her for her love and her hugs. I thanked her for her story. And I just, I just tucked that little tidbit away. So again, fast forward a couple more weeks, I'm back at work. Praise the Lord for Big B Coffee, honestly, because they were beyond what any employer ever should have been or would have expected to be. Maybe not should have been, but it was expected of them. The love that they showed me, the freedom that they gave me, to really just be hurt, but be there with them. That was really helpful for me. To have that ability to be with people, but not be with people at the same time. But so a couple of weeks after Gabe passed away, I left work early. I never was in the car around this time, but I was today. And there was a story on the radio. I typically listen to talk radio, and I listen to a radio station quite often called Strong Tower Radio here in Michigan. And they often share biblical health messages, inspirational things, uplifting things. And so as I was driving home, a story came on of a woman who she was a psychiatrist who ran a practice with her husband for 30 some years, and he very unexpectedly died in a car accident. And her whole life was wrapped up around her husband. Everything she did was with her husband, work, personal, that was her person. And as she described what it was like, those moments after losing him, those days after losing him, I knew exactly what she meant, because though it wasn't my husband that passed away, it was my son. And she started describing a syndrome that I had never heard of before. Of course, I had heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, but she was talking about post-traumatic growth. And the idea of when somebody goes through a traumatic event, if they choose to act in a certain way, they can come out of that event stronger and more loving and more resilient than ever. And so she talked about how she had lost her husband and what she did to lean in to now turn her practice to focus on widows and families that have lost a spouse or a caregiver. And she also described the situation in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, about those people that leaned into their community, those people that, even though they'd lost everything and they'd lost their home, they leaned right in, they helped out the community, they rebuilt, they were a force for good in their area, and that allowed them to heal so much faster and to heal so much more wholly, as opposed to just putting a Band-Aid over it and moving on, because that's what they had to do. And so I decided, after those two monumental moments after losing Gabriel, that was going to be my story. I was not going to let losing Gabe kill me. I was not going to let it destroy my family or lose me as a mother or lose me as a friend. There's still joy on this earth. There are still things to laugh about. The sun is still going to rise and the sun is still going to set. And so I have made an effort in the last 4 years. His birthday is actually coming up next week. He would be, a week from today, he would have turned 5 years old. And so we're going to celebrate that as a family together. And there might be some tears, but there's going to be laughter and there's going to be joy. And we're going to remember all the beautiful things about our little Gabriel. And then one thing that I'm slowly working on, it's a lot bigger project than I had anticipated. And Deb has been so kind with giving me advice and offering me some tips, but I'm already working on scripting and recording. I am creating a podcast called Abby's Road, and I'm going to share my story, and I'm going to talk about grief, and I'm going to talk about how it's okay to be happy and it's okay to be sad. And I want my story to be able to help others, touch them and lift them up, and show them that when you're hurting, God is right there hurting with you. And when you're crying, God is right there crying with you. And unfortunately, we live in a world that things just can't be perfect all the time. It's just not. That's not how our world works. But we have a God that loves us and that will always answer when we call, no matter what. And so that's my story. Sorry, it was a lot of tears. I do actually love talking about Gabriel. He was such a happy baby. He was walking at 9 months. I really think God let him do things earlier so that I could experience those moments with him. He told me he loved me at 13 months. And so I love talking about him. I love talking about how my family has grown and developed since that moment. And one humongous thing that has come out of this whole experience is my husband and I were both from Lansing, Michigan our entire lives. And so we decided, after Gabriel passed away, we decided to sell our home in Lansing. We moved to a small town called Farwell, Michigan, that neither of us had really even heard of before we landed here. And my husband actually opened a daycare. And so we currently have sweet little babies out in our living room, ranging from 7 months all the way up to sometimes 12 years old. She's at school right now. But Joseph, I now have a 2-year-old named Joseph. The Lord has blessed us with. I don't ever have to worry about him going to daycare. I don't ever have to worry about him being ignored or not being paid attention to. And at any moment in the day, I can get up and I can go out there and I can squeeze him, I can love him, I can hug him, I can help my husband. We now homeschool both of our older boys. So it's been beautiful, and we're together and we're strong, and the Lord has blessed us, and we want to make sure that we do the best thing that we can to protect the children in our community. So that's my story. If you do have any questions, I really am open to anything. I just am so thankful I was able to share with you.
Yes, and I wanted to share with everybody, I've watched Abby's story, which it's been many years now, from the background. Like, I've watched her personally grow, but the strength that Abby had, not only to grow herself and her family, but what you've done with Big B Coffee, you've put your heart and soul into the business without forgetting who you are. And your story needs to be told, because I had never heard of post-traumatic growth. It's like something like that happens, you just shut down and you don't exist. But Abby overcame that. And I think your podcast, and I'm pushing you for a book. I like to push. It needs to be shared. So you've done a wonderful job. And I know today was very sad to tell it, but thank you so much for sharing it with us. I know that somebody had written in the chat, I think it was Cindy, wrote in the chat about a book that may interest Abby as well as the others.
Yeah, it's this is possibly, Abby, a person that you might want to communicate with. Her husband walked out the front door 8 years ago and shot himself in the head outside the VA center, and she is my age, and she chose to do what you did. And she is a dear friend of mine. She chose to live, and she wrote a book. And but I think I'm blown away by who you are. I mean, the tears are like right here. My heart feels like it's going to explode, and there's no words for how much I admire you and your husband and your family. There's just no words for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I am going to walk through the world differently, not just today, but probably forever, from hearing you.
Oh, thank you.
I think Rachel, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to tell her, thank you so much for sharing. I sent you a private little message in the chat, Abby, but I don't know if you can see them or not. I just appreciate you sharing. I lost my husband. Well, I can understand both sides, the PTSD and the PTSG or PTG. I was in forensics for 10 years. I was a coroner investigator out of college. So some of my snarky and sarcastic and crazy stuff comes from that, because you have to have a different attitude to walk through some of the things you see with that. And then that I've tried to turn into more of the PTG, whatever it's called. I lost my husband at 5 years, almost 5 years ago. He was only 51 and fought brain cancer for a year out of the blue.
Sorry.
And not very many people know my whole story. Someday I'll be brave enough to speak it all out publicly like you just did. But there's a lot more to it than just caregiving for a year. There's a lot more to my story. And I think the more we can share and help others that have been through the same thing, hopefully it makes it a little easier for them, or they know there's different options for them or different choices they can make to continue and be happy. I felt so guilty the first time I caught myself just driving down the road singing to the radio after he had passed, like I always would. And you realize that some of those moments are good things. You know, you have to get back to life and keep paying it forward and doing good things for everybody else. And I cannot ever imagine, I never had biological children. I can't ever imagine that, you know, would have to be one of the worst things. And it's so great for you to share this and be putting all that good out there. Thank you for sharing with us this morning.
Thank you so much.
And Abby, I think the lesson here too is that we heard your story, and we now know that we need to be more of a support for people like yourself or Rachel or anybody else. And I know your Big B family was strong support, your community was a strong support, your church. And I think a lot of times we forget, like, it's too easy to say, oh, Abby's gone through a horrible thing. I don't know how to approach her. I don't know how to help her. So is it easiest, just to reach out and ask, Abby, how can we help you? How can we support you?
Absolutely. And just, when somebody is going through something, even just asking, do you want to talk about it? I can just listen. I don't have to say anything at all. I can just listen. And if they say no, that's okay. We can just sit in silence. Or do you want to do a craft? Or do you want to go for a walk? Nature is healing. If you don't know how healing nature is, go outside. Go spend some time in a forest by yourself. If you do not understand how healing, how much love and salve, like heart salve God has put in nature, like just go look at a streaming river or something, like go stare at the ocean. I don't know, like it's just, there's something in nature that will heal you. But yeah, when somebody's going through something, just be willing to ask, do you want me to listen?
Yeah, that's true. Audrey, do you have something to?
That's so awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Abby, I'm sorry, but you are amazing. Your family, your husband, everyone. And what is so cool, you really showed the growth, because your husband, then you opened up a home daycare. So children are cared for. So you took what you showed us, how you grew, not only spiritually, emotionally, but you passed it on to others. And thank you so much. I mean, yeah, I think everybody was probably crying with you today. So thank you, Abby. Thank you. And thank your husband as well, please. Thank you.
Perfect. Abby, I don't want to keep you any longer. You've given us so much of your time today. Thank you so much. I will tell everybody, Abby is on LinkedIn, so connect with her there. She's one to know. She's super busy. I do know that. And Abby, you and your family need to come out to Colorado. I say this all the time. Please. We have the space. You have a support group here, and you're talking about nature. Michigan's probably great. I won't say it.
Colorado's beautiful.
But we are really nice. So,
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Really, sometimes it's a little hard, sometimes it's a little more teary, but I love sharing, because you're right. People don't talk about these things, and they need to. People need to know that there's other people out there that are hurting too, and they have solutions to be able to get through the day and encourage you and lift you up and say something nice or say a prayer for you. And, just be willing to share your story. Be brave.
okay, and we'll talk soon again about that podcast. So,
Yes.
And you've got a lot of listeners right here that'll tune in. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank